By the time my manager slammed her palm on the glass table, I'd already memorized the number $9.8 million. That was the value of the contract. That was the amount she thought she could steal along with my career. What she didn't know was that the woman at the end of the table, the client, had just texted me 3 words that would burn the entire room down. Step outside now. My name is Madison Cole, and I was. For the next 3 minutes, a senior data strategist. I was mid-sentence, deep in the gleaming, glass-walled boardroom of Novapulse Analytica. My voice, steady until that moment, was explaining the predictive model I'd built from the ground up. This was not just any meeting. On one side of the 30-foot table sat the executive leadership of my firm, the CEO, the CFO, 2 VPs. On the other sat the team from Helix Crest Capital, a tech investment fund so large they didn't just follow the market, they made it. This presentation was the culmination of 12 straight weeks, not just business days, 12 weeks of 7-day-a-week, 18-hour-a-day work. It was a brutal, sleepless grind of coding, running models, and chugging lukewarm coffee at 3 a.m. The project, a comprehensive user behavior analysis for a new consumer AI platform Helix, was backing. The price tag on the proposal in front of them was $9.8 million. This was my baby, my design. My name was on the methodology. I was on slide 27, outlining the core of my findings. And this, I said, pointing the laser at the complex web on the screen, is what I've termed the Cole Vector Grid. It's a multivariate framework that doesn't just track user choice, it predicts user intent based on micro-hesitations. Wham! The sound was explosive in the hushed, climate-controlled room. It was not a tap. It was a full-palmed, dominant slam. Lena Harrow, my manager and the director of strategy, had struck the glass table. Every eye snapped to her. The Helix team, previously nodding, froze. My own leadership looked startled, then intensely uncomfortable. Lena didn't look at me. She stared at the screen, her face a mask of cold disappointment. Then, slowly, she turned her eyes on me. Her voice was not a shout. It was worse. It was a low surgical cut. "This," she said, clipping each word, "is a disaster." I stopped. My mouth was still open. The laser pointer in my hand was still aimed at the screen, its red dot trembling. "A complete," she continued, "and utter disaster." I could feel the blood drain from my face, only to rush back as a hot, prickling wave of humiliation. "Lena," I started, my voice a croak. "The model was tested. Unrealistic. It's academic. It's not strategic. You clearly do not understand the market, Maddie, at all." My pulse was a drum in my ears. This was not feedback. This was an execution. "I'm going to have to stop you," Lena said, pushing her chair back. The scrape of it on the floor was deafening. "Sit down, Maddie, before you embarrass us further." I stood there, paralyzed. For a full second, I looked toward my CEO, Grant. He was staring, with intense, sudden focus, at his iPhone, as if a critical email had just arrived. The VP of my division was suddenly fascinated by the grain of the wood veneer on the table. Not a single person would meet my eye. A few of my colleagues, analysts who I'd worked with, quickly looked down. I saw 2 of them exchange a whispered comment. They knew what this was. In my suit pocket, my phone began to vibrate. A single buzz, then another, and another, a rapid, insistent pulse against my hip. Lena was already on her feet, smiling at the clients, a warm, confident, in-control smile. "My apologies," she said smoothly, walking toward the head of the table where I stood. "A slight overcomplication from the data team. They get lost in the weeds. If you'll give me one moment, I'm going to make a quick course correction and show you the actual strategic approach we've prepared." She gestured for me to move, to give her my spot. I felt like I was moving through water. My hands fumbled with my laptop. I disconnected the HDMI cable, the click echoing in the silence. I gathered my notes, my trembling fingers fumbling a pen. which clattered loudly onto the glass. I picked it up, my face burning. As I backed away from the table, Lena was already plugging in her own laptop, her screen flashing to life. She looked triumphant. She looked, for the first time in weeks, relaxed. I turned and walked the long walk to the boardroom door. 30 feet felt like a mile. I did not look back. I pulled the heavy glass door open, stepped out onto the plush gray carpet of the hallway, and let it click shut behind me. The silence of the hallway was immediate. I leaned against the wall, my legs weak. My career at Novapulse was over. That was not a demotion. It was a public firing squad. Lena had just painted me as an incompetent, unreliable analyst in front of the biggest potential client of the year. I was radioactive. My phone vibrated again. One long buzz. I pulled it out of my pocket, my hands still shaking. 3 new messages from an unknown number. The first one read, Dr. Valerie Quinn, Helix Crest. My blood went cold. Valerie Quinn. She wasn't just a partner at Helix. She was the partner, a legend in consumer behavior, a near-mythical figure whose papers I had studied in grad school. She was sitting at the end of that table. The second text read, Step outside. I had. The third text read, Rooftop, now. I stared at the words, my mind struggling to process them. Why would Valerie Quinn, the client, text me? Why the rooftop? And then, it hit me. A realization so sudden and so sharp it stole my breath. The Cole vector grid, my framework. It wasn't built in a vacuum. It was an adaptation, an evolution, a practical application of a dense, highly theoretical framework published 8 years ago. A framework I had been obsessed with, a framework called the Quinn Behavioral Lattice. Valerie Quinn, my God, Lena. Lena had just stood up, in front of the entire leadership team, and told the literal author of the foundational theory that her work was a disaster, unrealistic, and embarrassing. Lena had no idea. She had never read the theory. She had only read my executive summaries. I stood there, frozen, in the empty hallway. From inside the boardroom, I could hear the muffled, confident drone of Lena's voice. She was in full presentation mode now, her voice smooth and persuasive. I could picture it perfectly. She would be presenting my slides, my data, my analysis, but she would have edited the footer. She would have replaced Cole Vector Grid with Harrow Strategic Framework. She would be presenting my work, claiming it as her course correction. My career had just been shattered. I was humiliated. I was probably fired. But as I stood there, a new feeling began to creep in, pushing past the shock, a cold, sharp anger, and something else, curiosity. Valerie Quinn had seen the whole thing. She had watched Lena detonate my career, and her first move was not to talk to my CEO, it was to text me, the humiliated analyst. Rooftop, now. My mind was made up. My career at Novapulse might be in ashes, but this was not over. I pushed myself off the wall, straightened my suit jacket, and walked past the reception desk toward the elevator bank. I pressed the button for the top floor. I had a strong feeling that whatever was about to happen, it was much, much bigger than a stolen presentation. The elevator doors opened onto a small, concrete landing. A heavy steel door stood between me and the open air. I pushed the panic bar, and the door hissed open, sucking me out into the sudden, sharp roar of the Denver wind. The rooftop was just concrete slabs and massive HVAC units, but at the far edge, overlooking the city, stood a figure. Dr. Valerie Quinn. She was exactly as her academic photos suggested, but more intense in person. Over 50, easily, her salt and pepper hair was pulled back in a tight, severe bun. She wore a perfectly tailored gray vest, and she stood, hands clasped behind her back, looking down at the traffic 20 stories below as if it were a simulation she was running. She didn't turn when I approached, the heels of my shoes clicking uselessly against the gravel roof. The wind whipped my hair across my face, stinging my eyes, which were still hot from the humiliation. The wind is brutal up here, she said, her voice cutting through the noise without any effort. But it's clarifying. She turned, her eyes pinning me. They were a pale, analytical blue. Madison Cole. Not Maddie, Madison. She knew my full name. You're 34. You have a master's in statistical analysis from CU Boulder, and you are the only analyst across all 3 firms that bid on this project who correctly identified and applied the Quinn behavioral lattice to a real-time data set. My stomach clenched. She knew. She had seen her own work inside mine. Your Cole vector grid, she continued, a flicker of something approval, maybe in her eyes. It's not just an application, it's a clever evolution. You solved the latency issue I never had the time to fix. I know this because I spent all of last night until about 4 a.m. I believe reading your code. Your log files are immaculate. By the way. I just stared. The woman whose work defined my field had just told me my logs were immaculate. The contrast to what Lena had just done downstairs was so violent, I felt dizzy. I need you to listen very carefully. Madison, Valerie said, her voice dropping, becoming more intense as she took a step closer. I have seen women like Lena Harrow before. They are managers who cannot build. So they are parasites who attach themselves to the actual talent, drain them dry, and then present the husk as strategic leadership. They are a plague in this industry. She paused. Helix Crest suspected this was the case. We've had dealings with Ms. Harrow in the past. Through other firms, we chose Nova Pulse for this bid partly to see if she was still pulling the same tricks. We wanted to verify a suspicion. How? I whispered, the wind stealing the word. How did you even know what to look for? Because someone on your side made sure I did, Valerie said. About 2 weeks ago, I received an anonymous, encrypted email. It came from someone inside your IT department. It contained file histories, metadata snapshots, and access logs for your last 3 major projects. It proved, unequivocally, that you were the sole architect of the analytics, and that your manager only accessed the final files 48 hours before a pitch. I felt the world tilt. An anonymous IT employee. Someone had seen. Someone had acted. What Lena just criticized you for, Valerie said, her eyes turning cold. The unrealistic elements, the academic modeling she called a disaster. Do you know what those were? I shook my head, numb. They were screenshots from your draft version 2.1 from 7 weeks ago, the one you fixed in version 3.0 when you developed the vector grid. My blood ran cold. What is she presenting in there right now? Version 2.1, Valerie said flatly. She is currently, and very confidently, presenting your old, flawed, rejected draft as her superior strategic approach. She is literally selling us the broken model you already fixed. The sheer staggering incompetence of it was breathtaking. Lena hadn't just stolen my work. She'd stolen the wrong work. Which brings us to you, Valerie said, turning to face me fully. The wind howled between us, a physical barrier. You have 2 choices. Madison, you can go back downstairs, take the demotion, and let that woman build her career on your spine. You can wait until she does this to you again, and again, until you're too broken or too cynical to build anything new. That is option 1. She paused, letting the weight of that terrible, true future sink in. Or, I managed, or you help me break this habit, for good. What do you want? Everything, Valerie said simply. I want the complete project histories. I want the email chains where you sent her updates, and she ignored them. I want the before analyses your finished work, and the after analyses the dumbed-down, strategically realigned versions she put her name on. I want every project you've worked on under her management. I hesitated. This was my boss, my company. This isn't an HR complaint, is it? I said. It wasn't a question. No, Valerie said. The shadow of a smile touched her lips. It is not. My primary role at Helix is behavioral analysis. My secondary, Less publicized role is as a compliance consultant for a fund that specifically investigates data and intellectual property fraud in the tech sector. What Ms. Harrow does isn't just bad management, it's a fraud. She is billing clients for expert work she is not performing, and she is attempting to steal intellectual property. This, Valerie said, gesturing back toward the building, is a legal investigation, and you are now a material witness. I looked away from her, out over the edge of the roof, down at the tiny cars. A legal investigation, my career, my reputation, my non-compete clauses all flashed through my mind. But beneath the fear, something else was hardening. It was the cold, clarifying rage of a scientist who just saw her hypothesis proven correct. Lena wanted my spine. She was about to find out it was made of steel. I met her gaze. "I will provide everything," I said, my voice steadier than I ever thought possible. "But it will be limited strictly to the scope of my own work, my data, my models, my emails. That's all I need," Valerie said. I knew. In that instant, there was no going back. This was a line. Once crossed, the map changes forever. I had just declared war on my boss, and I was using my new client as my air support. "Should I go back down?" I asked, thinking of the meeting. My laptop still on the floor where I'd left it. Valerie Quinn shook her head. "No, don't go back to the boardroom. Your presence isn't required." She turned back to look at the skyline, the conversation apparently over. "What needs to happen to Lena Harrow," she said, as the wind ripped the words from her mouth, "has already begun." The elevator ride down from the rooftop was a silent, vibrating fall. I returned to the 21st floor, my floor, and stepped out. The massive open-plan office was deserted. The meeting with Helix Crest was a mandatory all-hands event for leadership, which meant the entire C-suite and all the VPs were trapped in the glass box on the 32nd floor, leaving the analysts' pit, the engine room, in an eerie silence. The only sound was the white noise of the HVAC system, a constant, low-budget shushing. I sat at my desk. My dual monitors were dark, and I stared at the two pale, distorted reflections of Madison Cole, the woman who had been publicly, professionally gutted, but the face I saw was not crying. The humiliation had burned away, leaving something cold and hard. My hands were perfectly steady. The adrenaline-fueled tremor was gone, replaced by a crystalline, cold focus. I logged in. I navigated to the network drive, P drive, projects. I opened the folder that bore my name, M. Cole Archive. Inside, 2 years of my life were meticulously organized. 12-hour days, 7-day work weeks, skipped lunches, canceled vacations, the constant, grinding pressure to produce. Each folder represented a win for Nova Pulse, a success story that Lena had presented to the board. Each one was a piece of our company's backbone. I looked at the list of folders, and I knew what they really were. They weren't projects. They were bones. The bones of my career, and the careers of others, all picked clean. I started clicking. I didn't need to dig deep. The metadata was a bright, screaming confession. I right-clicked on Project Iron Peak Retail, a predictive inventory model that had supposedly saved our client millions. I clicked Properties, created by M. Cole. Date created 2 years ago, last modified by M. Cole. The activity log showed hundreds of saves, hundreds of modifications, all by me, over a span of 8 weeks. And then, one other entry, accessed by L. Harrow, the date 1 day before the final client presentation. I opened the official report PDF that had been sent to the Iron Peak CEO. The cover page, Strategic Analysis Recommendations, Lead Strategist Lena Harrow. My name was in the appendix. Data Support M. Cole. I closed the file, my breath catching. Support. I moved to the next one, Project Solara Mobility, a complex geographic optimization model for an EV charging network. I ran the access log, 6 straight weeks of my work, nightly commits to the code repository, timestamps showing 2 a.m., 3 a.m., 4 a.m., and then accessed by L. Harrow. The date the morning of the presentation. I opened the final Solara client deck. Lead strategist Lena Harrow. I scrolled to the end. My name was not in that one. Not at all. Project Brightnest Hotels. A dynamic pricing algorithm. The exact same story. A flurry of creation, iteration, and refinement by me. Then, a single, final access by Lena, who would then clone the folder, repackage the work, and present it as her own. It was a pattern, a perfect, predictable, parasitic pattern. She didn't guide me, she didn't manage, she didn't build, she just waited, and then she harvested. A shadow fell across my desk. I physically flinched, my hand slamming the mouse. Maddie? I looked up. It was Noah Ruiz. He was technically the head of our internal IT, but he was only 28. He was the guy who ran the fantasy football league and always had the best coffee. I realized with a sudden, painful lurch, my only actual friend at this company. His face was pale, his dark eyes darting around the empty rows of desks. Server room, he whispered. Now, do not bring your laptop. He didn't wait for an answer. He just turned and walked away, his sneakers silent on the industrial carpet. My heart, which had been beating with a cold, steady rhythm, suddenly hammered against my ribs. I stood and followed him. He walked past the colorful collaboration pods and the ironic think posters, stopping at a heavy gray steel door marked IT, authorized personnel only. He swiped his badge. The lock clicked, and he pulled the door open, gesturing me inside. The moment I crossed the threshold, the world dissolved. The room was a hurricane of noise, the deafening, high-pitched scream of hundreds of server fans. The air was frigid, pressurized, and smelled like hot metal and ozone. He let the heavy door thud shut, and the lock clicked, sealing us in. The roar was so loud it felt solid. "Okay," he shouted over the fans. "We have maybe 5 minutes. They're still in the meeting." "Noah, what is going on?" I yelled back, my voice sounding thin. "That meeting was—" "I know what it was." He cut me off, his expression tight with an anger I had never seen. "I was watching the remote feed for technical issues. I saw the whole thing, Maddie. It was me. I'm the one who sent the files to Dr. Quinn." I just stared at him, the noise of the fans seeming to recede. Why? "Because I've seen this movie before, and I'm sick of the ending," he shouted. "Remember Jessica Chen, senior analyst? 2 years ago. Brilliant. She was on the Solara project with you. Lena pushed her out for performance issues right after the pitch, and before her, David Kim. He built the entire framework for the Northwind Bank pitch. Lena fired him a week later for insubordination after she told the board his model was flawed. He pulled his phone from his pocket, the screen glowing bright in the dim, blue light of the server LEDs. He opened a spreadsheet. It wasn't one of mine. "I've been tracking her," he said, his thumb scrolling. "This is a log I built. It tracks access to the final project archives on the P drive versus the presentation schedules and the employee who did the work. Look," he held the phone up. It was a timeline of my life. Iron Peak M. Cole, 304 file modifications. L. Harrow, 1 file access. 1 file clone. Solara M. Cole, 512 file modifications. L. Harrow, 1 file access. 1 file clone. "She doesn't even use the original file," Noah yelled. "She clones the entire folder, renames it Harrow version final, deletes your name from the title slide, and presents it. She has been doing this to everyone." My eyes scanned the list and landed on a name. Wait, Northwind Banking. That was David Kim's project. That project was a disaster. We lost the client. Lena told everyone David's model was too aggressive and flawed. "The model wasn't flawed," Noah said, his voice cracking. "David's model was right. I pulled it from the archive." His final analysis predicted a 30% churn rate if they didn't fix their security backend. He predicted the exact risk, down to the decimal. But that's not what was presented, I said, the sick realization dawning. No, Lena presented a version where she had massaged the numbers, she beautified the data. She told the client their churn risk was under 5%. They signed. 3 months later, they had a massive data breach, lost a third of their customers, and canceled the contract. Lena used David's correct analysis as proof of his negative attitude and fired him before the client even pulled out. She blamed him for the pitch and the failure. My blood ran cold. I thought back to my own performance reviews. Lena's voice, always so smooth, so supportive. I pulled out my own phone, my fingers fumbling as I opened my work email. I searched Lena Harrow. The pattern was there. It was all there. Emails to me. Maddie, this is excellent technical work. Really granular. Good job. Emails from her to the CEO, which she had accidentally copied me on once. Grant, Maddie has great technical potential, but she still lacks the strategic vision to interface with clients. I'll need to continue to lead the strategic narrative for this one. She wasn't just stealing the work. She was building a paper trail to prove I was incapable of doing it. She was positioning me as a data janitor while she played the visionary. Noah, I said, my voice barely a whisper in the mechanical gale. She's a parasite, he said. And she's smart, which is why you have to be careful. The system logged my file transfer to Quinn. It's an encrypted packet, but the timestamp and the file size are there. If this blows up, and they launch an internal investigation into leaking client data, I'm the first one against the wall. I'm on an H-1B visa. Maddie, if they fire me because I lose everything, I get deported. I looked at him, this 28-year-old kid who had just risked his entire life in this country to save my career. The weight of it settled on me. This was no longer just about me. This was about Noah. It was about David Kim and Jessica Chen. It was about every analyst she had ever fed on. I had a choice, a clear, stark choice. I could do nothing. Lena would continue. She would find a way to destroy Noah for the leak, and she would methodically, patiently, and professionally destroy me. Or I could stand up. I could take the evidence Valerie Quinn had asked for, use Noah's logs, and fight. But it wouldn't be a fight. It would be a war, and I would be pulling Noah and all the other victims onto the battlefield with me. I met his terrified, defiant eyes and nodded. A single, sharp dip of my chin. Give me access. To what? He yelled. A full admin export of my project logs, all of them, and the access logs for Lena's account against my folders. And the email chain about Northwind. He hesitated for only a second. Then his fingers flew across his phone, remotely typing commands into the system. It'll be on your local machine in 30 seconds. Zip it, get it on an external hard drive, and get it out of this building. They're all still in that meeting. You have time. I walked out of the server room, the roar cutting off as the door sealed, leaving me in a ringing, terrifying silence. The cold air clung to me. I sat at my desk. A notification popped up. Export. Zip had downloaded. I fumbled in my purse, my fingers finding the small, aluminum external drive I kept for backups. I plugged it in. I dragged the file. As the blue progress bar filled, I felt a strange, chilling sensation. It felt like I was stealing, but it was my work, my hours, my code, my name. I was stealing back my own life. The transfer completed, I ejected the drive, dropped it into my bag, and zipped it shut. I grabbed my coat. I didn't know what would happen when that meeting on the 32nd floor broke. I didn't know what Lena or the CEO would do, but I knew I would be facing leadership tonight, and this time, I was bringing the data. The email arrived at 3:45 p.m. It was not a request. It was a summons. From the CEO's executive assistant, the subject line was just, urgent. The body, Maddie Cole, into CEO Grant Ellison's office at 4 p.m. Do not be late. No please, no context, just a command. I'd been sitting at my desk in the silent, empty office for hours, the external drive a cold weight in my bag. The silence was over. Grant Ellison's office was on the corner, all glass, overlooking the mountains. It was designed to impress, and today, it was designed to intimidate. They were already seated when I walked in. Grant, the CEO, behind his massive oak desk. To his right, our HR director, Sarah, holding a leather-bound notebook, a look of practiced neutrality on her face. And to his left, Lena Harrow. She looked composed, concerned, and slightly sad, like a dedicated mentor disappointed by a protege. The chair intended for me was already pulled out. It was not one of the comfortable leather guest chairs facing the desk directly. It was a smaller, stiffer chair, placed slightly off to the side, angled toward the center of the room. It was the chair for someone who was not a participant in the meeting, but the subject of it was, I noted with cold clarity, also about 2 inches lower than theirs. I placed my hands in my lap and waited. Grant steepled his fingers. Maddie, thank you for coming. I think we all know the meeting this morning with Helix Crest did not go as planned. Lena leaned forward, her voice saturated with regret. Grant, I just feel awful. I've been mentoring Maddie for months, trying to get her ready for this level of client interaction. I thought she was there. I really did. But she just froze. I kept my hands clasped. I did not move. I did not blink. She completely veered off the brief we'd agreed on, Lena continued, her voice a performance of pained leadership. She started presenting raw, untested models. Frankly, it was confusing for the client. When I tried to gently course correct, to bring her back to the approved strategy, she became resistant, argumentative. I had to make a tough call to protect the firm and the client relationship. I had to step in. It was a perfect narrative. She was the strong leader, forced to clean up the analyst's mess. Grant nodded slowly, his face grim, accepting this version of events. That's unfortunate to hear. Very. But that's not the worst part, Lena said, her voice dropping. Sarah, the HR director, tensed, pen at the ready. We have reason to believe that someone, she glanced at me, a flicker of pained accusation, sent raw confidential data files directly to the client before the meeting. My blood ran cold. She was using Noah's leak. But she was twisting it, painting it as an act of rogue incompetence by me. Dr. Quinn was apparently very confused, Lena said. She had seen versions of the model that were not approved. It completely undermined my authority and the firm's official position. She looked at me, her eyes full of fake sorrow. Maddie, you're the only analyst who had full administrative access to that entire data set. Why would you do that? I took a breath. I kept my voice low and steady. I did not freeze. Lena, I was presenting the Cole vector grid, which I developed over the last 12 weeks. Maddie, Lena interrupted, we discussed this. And I did not, I continued, speaking directly to Grant, ignoring Lena. Send any files, raw or otherwise, to Helix Crest, not once. I turned my head to Lena. And the unrealistic disaster framework you criticized in that room, the Quinn Behavioral Lattice, was specifically requested in the Helix RFP. It's the entire reason they were interested in us. You called Dr. Quinn's own life's work a disaster to her face. Lena's eyes flashed with genuine fury, her composure cracking. She opened her mouth, but Sarah from HR cut in, her voice as smooth and synthetic as Teflon. Maddie, let's keep the focus on procedure here, Sarah said, tapping her pen. What Lena is saying is that there was a breakdown in the established review process. We're not here to assign blame. We're here to understand the gap in communication and protect the firm's integrity. It was a classic HR maneuver. Protecting the firm meant protecting the director, and gap in communication meant the analyst is the one who will pay for it. My factual defense was irrelevant. The narrative was already set. Grant sighed, rubbing the bridge of his nose. He hated this. Not the injustice, the inconvenience. Right. Well, this is a mess. We can't have this. We can't have analysts going rogue, and we can't have our directors being undermined. We still have a shot at this Helix deal, but Lena needs to be in full control of the narrative from here on out. He looked at me, his face impassive. Maddie, effective immediately. You're being pulled from all client-facing projects. You're off Helix. You're off everything. We're moving you to internal research. Effective now. You'll be auditing our legacy systems until we can get this situation clarified. We need to be sure we can trust your judgment. It was a corporate prison, a do-nothing job designed to bore me into quitting. My career here is over. I had been officially and efficiently sidelined. That's all, Grant said. A clear dismissal. Lena looked relieved, triumphant. She had won. I was about to stand up from my low-angled chair, and then Grant's desk phone lit up, not his cell, his private desk line. He looked at it, annoyed. He saw the name on the display. His annoyance vanished, replaced by confusion, then concern. His executive assistant buzzed in, her voice tinny over the speaker. Grant, I'm sorry to interrupt, but Dr. Valerie Quinn's office is on the line. She's insisting. Grant's face paled slightly. He nodded, and his assistant, a woman I'd never seen, slipped into the room and whispered in his ear. I watched Grant's face. The color drained from it. He looked alarmed. He nodded to his assistant. She slipped back out. Well, Grant said, his voice a different texture now, tighter. That was interesting. Lena leaned forward. What is it? Grant, is there a problem with the deck? Dr. Quinn? Grant said slowly, looking at his desk, not at us. Has just requested a private, urgent meeting with me and our general counsel. General counsel, Sarah from HR repeated, her pen finally still. Specifically, Grant continued, she wants to discuss the data integrity of the current Helix engagement and the proprietary nature of the presented frameworks. Lena's composure, which had been so flawless, cracked. I saw it, a tiny, almost invisible tightening around her eyes, a flicker of pure, unadulterated panic. She recovered in a second. Well, of course, Lena said, her voice bright. That's just residual confusion from Maddie's leak. Grant, I should absolutely be in that meeting. I can clear this all up. I can walk them through the correct strategic model and explain the technical side. Grant Ellison finally looked up. He looked past me. He looked past Sarah. He looked directly at Lena, and for the first time, he looked at her with the same cold, appraising stare he had just given me. No, Lena, he said, his voice flat. I don't think you should. He paused. Let me just see what the client wants to say first. The unspoken words hung in the air. Valerie Quinn's word now matters more than yours. You're dismissed, Maddie, Grant said, already waving me away. His mind clearly on the next, more important fire. I stood up. I walked out. I didn't look at Lena. I stepped out of the corner office, into the hallway, and the door clicked shut behind me. I was still on the internal research project. I was still in corporate jail. But the warden had just been told the prison was on fire. I got to my desk. An email had already arrived from HR. Per our conversation, you are hereby removed from all access groups related to the Helix Crest engagement. My phone was in my hand. The external drive was still in my bag. I was suspended in limbo, a pariah in my own company. Then, my phone buzzed. A text from a familiar, unknown number, Valerie Quinn. Don't panic, it read. Tides turn. Check your personal email tonight. I didn't drive fast. I drove the speed limit. I felt like the whole world was watching me. By the time I got back to my small apartment in the suburbs, my hands were aching from gripping the steering wheel. The sun was setting, casting long, ugly shadows across my living room. I didn't bother turning on the lights. I walked straight to the kitchen, dumped my bag on the floor, and pulled out the company laptop and the small, heavy external drive. I spread everything out on the kitchen table, the laptop, the drive, the notebooks I'd filled over the last 12 weeks, my life's work. I sat there in the dusk, the adrenaline draining away, leaving behind a deep, seismic exhaustion. I felt hollowed out, scooped clean. I did the only thing I could think to do. I pulled out my cell phone and called my mom, Karen Cole, retired high school chemistry teacher. She picked up on the second ring, cheerful. "Maddie, honey, what a surprise." My voice came out as a rasp. "Hey, Mom." Her cheerfulness vanished. "What's wrong?" I told her. The short version. The humiliation. The $9.8 million pitch. The slam on the table. Lena's words. "Sit down." Being pulled off the project. Being accused of leaking the files. I just laid the facts out, one after another, like dead specimens on a tray. When I finished, there was a long silence on the line. My mom wasn't a, "Oh, honey, that's terrible" kind of person. She was a, "What's the variable" kind of person. "Madison," she said finally, her voice hard. "She's accusing you. They're accusing you. I have one question. Just one. Can you prove you made what you say you made?" The question hit me like a physical blow. It was the exact same thing she'd asked me when I was 13. I'd spent 6 months building a model volcano, not with baking soda, but with a pressurized chemical reaction I'd designed myself. My science teacher, Mrs. Gable, had insisted on presenting it for me at the state finals. Just to make sure the key strategic points are hit, my mom had found me crying in the garage. She'd knelt down and asked me that same question. "Can you prove you made it?" I nodded, pointing to my notebook, the one with all the failed formulas and calculations. "Then that's all that matters," she'd said. "Go get your notebook. We're going to talk to the principal." I won the state final that year. I presented it myself. "Yes," I said into the phone, my voice no longer a rasp. "Yes, Mom, I can prove it." "Good," she said. "Then turn on the lights, make some coffee, and get your notebook, the real one." We hung up. I sat in the dark for another minute, then I stood up, flipped the kitchen light switch, flooded the room in harsh fluorescent light, and went to the coffee machine. For the next 3 hours, I worked. I was no longer an employee. I was an archaeologist. I opened every project folder. I exported every Git commit log, showing every line of code I'd written, time-stamped. I took screenshots of the Slack messages. Me. "Lena, I've got the new model. It's testing 30% more accurate." Lena. "Great." I screenshotted the emails. Me. "Attaching the full final draft for your review." Lena. "Got it." I noted the timestamps. She'd requested the full copy of the Helix project at 7 p.m. on a Friday. She hadn't accessed it again until the morning of the pitch. My personal laptop pinged. An email, not to my work account, from a secure address, Valerie Quinn. The email was brief, formatted like a legal request. "Madison, I need the following: 1. Full admin access logs for all relevant project folders. 2. Official task assignment lists or project management tickets. 3. Anything, and I mean anything, that shows a discrepancy between the actual hours worked by your team and the strategic hours Ms. Harrow has claimed on invoices sent to clients." My stomach twisted. Invoices. Valerie wasn't just looking for stolen credit. She was looking for fraudulent billing. This was a whole new level. Before I could even reply, a different notification popped up. A secure messaging app I only used with one person. Noah. The icon was a simple, flashing red dot. Noah. "Are you safe? Are you alone?" Me. "Yes. At home. What's wrong, Noah?" "Don't panic. But after you left, I went digging. I didn't just look at the P drive. I looked at the backup server, the one they use for executive retention. Noah Maddie. I found something. Noah. There's a hidden directory. It's named Everest HR. It's not on the main network map. It's masked. Access is restricted to 2 users, L, Harrow, and B, Roland. Me B, Roland. Blake Roland, the CFO. Noah. Yes. And Maddie. I'm in it. I'm looking at it right now. Noah. She copied everything. It's a shadow archive of all your work. Solara, Iron Peak, Bright Nest, and Helix. Noah. But the files are all renamed. Harrow Pricing Model V4. Harrow Mobility Grid Final Noah. And there are other files, PDFs, contracts, Maddie, their license agreements, Noah. She's preparing to sell them. I felt the blood drain from my face. I read the next line. Noah. To a company called Brightline Vertex. Brightline Vertex, our #1 rival. The one that always seemed to magically land on the same solutions we did. Just 6 months later, Lena wasn't just stealing my work to present to our clients. She was packaging it to sell to our competition, and the CFO knew. My fingers were numb as I typed. Me. Is that everything? A new message popped up from Noah. It was just a file name. Noah Cole Grid, V3, El Harrow Patent Draft. DocX. I stopped breathing. A DocX file, a patent draft. Cole Grid V3, my name, my model. Harrow, her name. She was trying to patent my work, my baby, my name. She was trying to file a patent on the Cole Vector Grid, attaching her name to it, and erasing me from its very identity. This wasn't theft. It was an erasure of my professional existence. Noah. Wait, there's more. Invoices. Dozens of them. Not just Helix. Noah. She's been billing strategic oversight hours, 20, 30 hours a week. On top of the analyst team's hours, Maddie, I'm looking at the Brightnest account. She billed them for $200,000 in strategic consulting fees for a project me that she only accessed the day before the pitch. Noah. Yes, the logs prove it. The server logs prove she didn't do the work. The Everest HR folder proves she was billing for it. This Maddie. This is federal. He was right. This had just escalated from a brutal office war to a potential felony. This wasn't about a mean boss. This was about systematic, high-level corporate fraud. Lena and the CFO. I stood up from the kitchen table. The coffee I'd made was cold. The room was spinning. But my mind was a single, cold point of light. I knew exactly what I had to do. I sat back down. I replied to Noah. Me. Send it. Send me everything in that folder. Zip it. Encrypt it. Send it to my personal account. Now. Noah sending. God. Maddie. This is me. I know. But she threatened your visa today. Noah. She threatened to deport you to keep you quiet. We're done being quiet. The file, massive, arrived in my inbox. I downloaded it. I bundled it with my own exported logs, my screenshots, my timelines. I created a single, encrypted package, a digital bomb. I opened a new, secure email draft to Valerie Quinn. I attached the file. I wrote a single line in the body. Dr. Quinn, here is everything. It's worse than we thought. I paused, my finger hovering over the send button. I thought about Noah. I thought about his visa. I thought about the risk he was taking. I added one more line. If we do this, we do it right, but I need Noah protected. His name stays out of it until he has immunity. I hit send. The file was uploaded. The small blue bar crawled across the screen, carrying 2 years of my life, the proof of my work, and the careers of Lena Harrow and Blake Rowland. The email disappeared from my outbox. I turned off the kitchen light. I sat in the dark, the laptop screen glowing on my face. It was done. The experiment was running. The variables were all in play, and all I could do now was wait for the results. The summons came at 7 a.m., not to my work email, but to the personal one I'd given Valerie. The address wasn't Nova Pulse. It was a tower on 17th Street, a law firm whose name was etched into a discreet brass plaque. Sherman, Wade, and Klein. The lobby was a cathedral of marble and silence, the kind of place where the air itself seemed to be billed in 6-minute increments. A silent assistant met me, led me to a high-speed elevator, and deposited me on the 42nd floor. The room was not a boardroom. It was a war room. The walls were glass, but they were covered in rolling whiteboards filled with diagrams and legal pad notes. Dr. Valerie Quinn was there, standing by the window with a coffee, but she was not the center of gravity. At the head of a long, polished table sat a man in a severe suit, his face impassive. He introduced himself as Helix's general counsel, To his right sat another man, younger, with an intense, focused energy, a laptop open in front of him. He was, I learned, a forensic data specialist. "Ms. Cole?" the lawyer began. His voice was flat, without greeting or warmth. "Thank you for coming. I'll be blunt. Helix Crest Capital is an investment fund. We manage public, private, and state pension money. We are bound by extremely strict federal compliance regulations. By law, we cannot be in partnership with an entity that is engaged in, or is covering up, material fraud. The file you and your colleague provided last night suggests we are currently in partnership with exactly such an entity." He nodded to the specialist. The specialist didn't look at me. He looked at the large screen on the wall. "It's not a suggestion," he said, his voice crisp. "It's a verifiable, repeatable pattern." The screen lit up. It was Noah's data, but transformed, weaponized. It was a clean, terrifying flowchart. The logs from Mr. Ruiz, correlated with Ms. Cole's project archives, establish a clear steal and repackage methodology used by Director Harrow. The metadata is unambiguous. He clicked. But the files from the Everest HR directory, the ones implicating CFO Blake Rowland, are the accelerant. Another click. A list of file names. These draft license agreements are the core problem. Director Harrow and CFO Rowland were preparing to sell proprietary models developed for Novapulse clients to a third-party competitor. He highlighted the name. Brightline Vertex. Valerie Quinn finally spoke, her voice like ice. "Brightline." She turned from the window. "We've suspected them for 18 months. They pitched a deal to one of our subsidiaries using a behavioral model that looked familiar. It was a distorted, clumsy version of the Quinn lattice, but we couldn't figure out where they'd gotten the architecture. We assumed we had an internal leak." She looked at the lawyer. "We didn't. The leak was coming from our vendors. It was coming from Novapulse, from Lena." The specialist pointed to the screen again. "Worse, Brightline Vertex is already on an SEC watch list for questionable reporting. Selling them a stolen, high-level analytics framework is high-risk behavior." The lawyer nodded, as if this confirmed a simple calculation. He slid a thick, bound document, perfectly square, to the center of the table. "Which brings us to this," he said. "This is a memorandum of findings. It is being delivered to your CEO, Grant Ellison, and your general counsel as we speak." He looked at me. "Your company has two paths. Path A. They cooperate, fully and immediately. They conduct an immediate and transparent internal cleansing. They remove Ms. Harrow and Mr. Rowland from their positions. They reimburse Helix and all other affected clients for all fraudulent billing, and they agree to retain the Helix contract under new, strict, and verifiable supervision." He paused, letting the silence hang. "Path B, they deny, they deflect, they protect their executives, in which case, Helix Crest immediately terminates the $9.8 million engagement, and this entire bundle," he tapped the thick memo with one finger, "is hand-delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission and the Department of Justice, SEC, DOJ." The words sucked the air from the room. I was just trying to save my career. And now I was in a room where people were casually discussing federal investigations. My eyes fell to the memo. The cover page was visible. I saw my name. I leaned closer, reading the upside-down text. "We propose that all future engagement on the Helix account be placed under the direct supervision of the framework's primary author, Madison Cole." I read the sentence 3 times. Primary author, not data support, not internal research. Primary author. The lawyer saw me reading it. His expression didn't change. "Ms. Cole, I need to be very clear with you. This is no longer an HR dispute. This is the predicate for a potential criminal investigation. If it moves to that, you will be a material witness. Your emails, your personal chats, your notebooks, everything will be subject to subpoena. From this moment forward, you must be absolutely, rigorously truthful. No speculation, no emotion, just the data." My throat was dry. My voice came out as a croak. I have a condition. The lawyer raised one eyebrow, a fraction of an inch. Noah Ruiz, I said, my voice gaining strength. The IT analyst. He's on an H-1B visa. He did this to protect the company, to expose this. He didn't do it to lose his life here. Lena, people like Lena. They don't just take the hit, they retaliate. She will try to have him fired, to have him deported, for leaking the files. He cannot be the scapegoat. Valerie answered before the lawyer could. Agreed, she said instantly. She walked to the table and flipped several pages into the memo. She pointed. We've accounted for that. Mr. Ruiz is described in this document as a cooperative whistleblower, acting in good faith to report suspected federal wire fraud. If Novapulse attempts any form of retaliation, they will have a federal whistleblower suit on their hands, in addition to the fraud charges. They had thought of everything. This was not a fight. It was a controlled demolition. The lawyer stood up, smoothing the front of his suit jacket. The memo has been delivered. We have requested an emergency, in-person meeting with the Novapulse Board of Directors for tomorrow morning. You will, of course, be required to attend. The meeting was over. I was dismissed. I stood up, my legs feeling strangely disconnected from my body. I rode the silent, high-speed elevator down 42 floors. I pushed through the heavy glass doors and stepped out onto the sidewalk. It was 9 a.m. The sun was bright. The street was full of people grabbing coffee, talking on their phones, heading to meetings. Normal life. I stood there, frozen, watching the stream of people pass by. It was not a corporate drama anymore. It was not about Lena. It was about the SEC. It was about Brightline Vertex. It was about wire fraud. This was not going to be an internal memo. This was going to be in the financial news. This was going to be national. My small, desperate act of self-defense. The file I sent from my kitchen table had just armed a missile, and tomorrow morning, I was being asked to watch it land. The day had been a whirlwind of sterile law offices and high-speed elevators. The night was a different animal. It was a slow, creeping dread. I pulled into my assigned spot in the concrete underground parking garage of my apartment building. It was late, past 8 p.m. The air was cold and smelled of gasoline and damp cement. I was exhausted. My mind still processing the words SEC and DOJ. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat, stepped out, and locked my car. I was halfway to the elevator lobby when I stopped. Something was wrong. A single, plain white business envelope was tucked under the windshield wiper of my car. My heart didn't just stop. It seized. This was a secure garage. You needed a key fob to get the gate open. I lived alone. I had not told anyone at work where I lived. I backed away from the car, my eyes scanning the shadowed corners, the concrete pillars. The garage was silent except for the hum of a ventilation fan somewhere. I walked back to the car slowly, as if approaching a trap. I pulled the envelope from under the wiper. It was stark white. No name. No address. My fingers felt numb as I tore it open. Inside were 2 pieces of paper. The first was a printout. My eyes scanned the text, and a cold sickness washed over me. It was an email. My personal, private email, from my Gmail account. It was the email I had sent to my mom. Karen Cole. Just last night, after the disastrous pitch but before I knew the full extent of Lena's fraud. Mom. I don't know if I can do this. She humiliated me. She just told me to sit down in front of everyone. I feel like my career is over. I just want to quit. My own words, my own moment of weakness, printed out in black and white, held in my hand in a cold, dark garage. The second piece of paper was a single sheet, folded. I opened it. A few words, printed from a computer, centered on the page. They will think you are too weak to lead the project. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth. This wasn't just a threat. This was a violation. They had been in my email. My personal email. This wasn't a corporate battle. This was a total invasion. Lena, or someone working for her, had hacked me, my safe space, my apartment. Suddenly felt like the most dangerous place in the world. I ran, I ran to the elevator, my hand shaking so hard I could barely jam the key fob against the sensor. The ride up to the 12th floor felt like an hour. I burst into my apartment, slammed the door, and threw the deadbolt, the chain, and the security latch. I leaned against the door, breathing heavily, my eyes darting around my own living room. It was quiet, but it was no longer safe. They had seen the email to my mom. What else had they seen? My bank statements, my messages with Noah, my communication with Valerie. I spent the next 2 hours locking down my life. I changed my email password, my bank password, my phone password. I enabled two-factor authentication on everything. I felt stupid, exposed. I was a data analyst, and I had been this careless. I sat on my couch, the lights off, watching the city lights of Denver blur through the window. I hadn't slept in what felt like days. I was exhausted, but my mind was a high-tension wire. Every sound the building made, the groan of the pipes, the hiss of the radiator, the ding of the elevator down the hall made me jump. At 11:48 p.m., my phone rang. The screen lit up the dark room. The name on the display made my blood turn to ice. Lena Harrow. I stared at it. Ring 1, ring 2. She knew I was awake. She knew I was terrified. The envelope had been the appetizer. This was the main course. My mind snapped into focus. The fear was still there, a cold knot in my stomach. But the analytical part of me, the part that my mom had raised, took over. Get the data. I reached for my second phone, my old personal one that I kept on my nightstand as an alarm clock. It had a recording app. I swiped it open, hit record, and placed it on the coffee table. On the fourth ring, I picked up my work phone. Hello? My voice was dry. Maddie. Lena's voice was like warm syrup. It was the voice she used on clients, the voice of pure, manufactured concern. Oh, thank God I reached you. I've been so worried about you. I said nothing. Maddie, I know you must be so frightened, so confused. This whole Helix thing, it's just a tiny misunderstanding. Grant and we're handling it. It's all just corporate noise. You got yourself caught in the middle, and I feel just awful about it. I stayed silent. In the dark, the small red light of the recording app on my other phone was a steady, burning eye. Listen to me, she cooed. All you have to do is stop. Stop talking to clients. Stop escalating this. This is out of your depth. Honey, I can fix this. I can make this all go away. I can protect you. But you have to let me. Protect me, I repeated. My voice flat. The syrup vanished. The change was so fast it was breathtaking. The warmth evaporated, leaving a voice as cold and hard as a diamond drill. Don't be naive, Madison. You're a good technician. You're a fantastic little workhorse, but you are strategically blind. You always have been. You think data wins the room? You think your models matter? They don't. I win the room. I make the story. Without me, no executive, no client, no one at all would listen to your academic nonsense for 5 minutes. I could hear her breathing, a controlled, steady rhythm. She was enjoying this. And I know what you did, she said, her voice dropping to a near whisper. I know what you and that little IT boy did. You think you're clever, pulling server logs. You think you're whistleblowers. She laughed, a short, sharp, ugly sound. Let me explain to you what you really are. You're two very, very stupid children who have just committed a federal crime. You think you're exposing me. What you've done, Maddie, is leak proprietary data to an outside party. You have compromised the firm. You have compromised our clients. My hand was gripping my phone so tightly my knuckles were white. And here is what happens next, Lena continued, her voice bored, as if explaining a simple equation. I have very good, very expensive lawyers who understand corporate context. They will frame my work as executive oversight. But your little friend, the one on the H-1B visa, what's his name, Noah? She said his name. My stomach bottomed out. He doesn't have good lawyers, and when Grant and the board are faced with a choice, protect the director who brings in millions of dollars, Or throw the expendable analyst who overstepped and the immigrant IT guy who actually broke the law under the bus? Who do you think they're going to choose? She let the question hang in the air, a poisoned dart. You've ruined him, Maddie, you, with your self-righteous little crusade. You've destroyed his life, and you are about to destroy your own. Call off your client. Stop this. Now. It's your only chance. The line clicked. She was gone. I sat in the dark for a full minute, the silence of the room roaring. My hands were shaking. But it wasn't fear. It was a pure, cold, concentrated rage I had never felt in my life. She had threatened Noah. She had used his visa, his life, as a weapon to control me. I picked up my other phone. I stopped the recording. I saved the file. I named it Lena Harrow Threat 2348 4A. I opened a new, secure email. I addressed it to Valerie Quinn. I CC'd Noah's personal account. I attached the audio file. I wrote one sentence in the body. This is how she leads. I hit send. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked down at the city, at the thousands of lights still on, all the people working, or sleeping, or fighting. I realized, standing there, that the meeting tomorrow morning was no longer just about my job. It wasn't about the money. It was about whether people like Lena Harrow were allowed to exist in this industry. It was about whether they were allowed to devour people like Noah, and David, and Jessica, and me, just to get ahead. And I realized I was no longer a witness. I was the prosecutor. The next morning, I was summoned not to an office, but to a hearing. I walked into the main boardroom on the 32nd floor, the one with the 20-foot oak table and the panoramic view of the mountains, and the air was thick. This was not the small, intimidating setup in Grant's office. This was the seat of power. The entire board of directors was present. Seated along the far side of the table, CEO Grant Ellison looked gray and exhausted. Nova Pulse's general counsel, a severe woman named Arlene Hayes, sat at the head of the table. Dr. Valerie Quinn sat near her, a calm, neutral observer. And then there was my seat. Yesterday, I was in the low, angled chair of the accused. Today, a single chair had been left for me at the main table, next to the VPs. It was a seat that was equal in height. It was the seat of a material witness. Across the room, in a separate seating area away from the main table, sat Lena Harrow. She was not alone. She had a sleek, expensive-looking lawyer by her side, a man who was all polished surfaces. Lena's face, usually so expressive, was a mask of cold stone. She watched me sit down, and her eyes were flat, dead. Arlene Hayes, the general counsel, stood. Her voice was crisp and carried across the silent room. Good morning. We are here to conduct a fact-finding meeting. I want to be clear about what this is and what it is not. This is not a court of law. This is an assessment of legal and reputational risk to Novapulse, based on a memorandum received yesterday from Helix Crest Capital. Everything said in this room is on the record and may, of course, become material in a formal investigation. We are here for facts. She nodded to the door. Mr. Ruiz, please come in. Noah walked in, carrying his IT laptop. He looked like he hadn't slept in a week, but his hand was steady. He didn't look at Lena. He walked to the head of the table, plugged his laptop into the main console, and the massive 80-inch screen on the wall flickered to life. It was not a PowerPoint. It was a timeline, a brutal, simple, devastating timeline. At the request of the board's counsel, Noah began, his voice clear and amplified by the room's microphones. I've compiled the file access and modification logs for the 9 most recent high-value projects, cross-referencing analyst work with executive access. The screen is populated. Project Iron Peak Retail, a massive blue bar of activity showing hundreds of file modifications, all by M. Cole and J. Chen, over a period of 8 weeks. Then, a single red dot L. Harrow, file access, 1X, the date 24 hours before the client pitches. He clicked. Project Solara Mobility, the same. A flurry of activity from 3 analysts over 6 weeks. A single red dot from Lena. The morning of the presentation. He clicked again. Project Brightnest Hotels. And again. And again. The pattern was undeniable. A factory of analyst work. And a single toll booth at the end where Lena's name was stamped on. The room was dead silent. Lena's lawyer leaned forward, his voice smooth and reasonable. Ms. Hayes, if I may, this is thin. Metadata does not, and cannot, reflect the totality of an executive's contribution. My client's job is strategic oversight, not data entry. This chart doesn't show the offline meetings. It doesn't show the handwritten notes, the phone calls, the high-level strategic thinking that she provided to her team. Director Harrow manages. This proves nothing. Lena nodded. A single, firm gesture of agreement. Arlene Hayes nodded. A valid point, counselor. She then turned to a man I hadn't recognized, sitting at the far end of the table. Which is why, upon receiving the memo from Helix Crest, the board engaged its own independent forensic data specialist last night, Mr. Thorne. The man, Thorne, leaned into his microphone. He was the counterpunch. I can address that, Thorne said, his voice dry as dust. I spent the last 12 hours analyzing the complete server data, not just the access logs. I looked for any digital footprint of this alleged strategic guidance. The screen changed to Thorne's presentation. It was a simple, stark no sign. I found no evidence of strategic contribution from Director Harrow, Thorne said. I analyzed her Excel macros. There are none. I analyzed her Python scripts. There are none. I reviewed her Git commits. There are none. More importantly, every handwritten note or offline strategy would, by necessity, have to be translated into a digital instruction for the analysts. There are no emails. There are no Slack messages. There are no comments in the code repositories. There are no markup notes in any Word document or PDF. According to the digital record, Director Harrow's strategic thinking was never communicated to her team because it does not exist. A wave of shock rippled through the board members. Grant Ellison looked physically ill. It was the CFO, Blake Rowland, who finally broke the silence. He tried to laugh. A dry, nervous cough. All right. So Lena's not a coder. We get it. This seems to be an internal dispute. A fight over credit, attribution. Surely this is an HR matter. Something we can resolve internally. It's not something that needs to involve our clients. He was trying to shrink the problem, to box it back into an office squabble. He looked at Valerie Quinn, as if appealing to her to be reasonable. It was a fatal mistake. Doctor. Valerie Quinn finally leaned forward, her voice cutting through the room like a scalpel. This stopped being an HR matter. Mr. Rowland, when it started appearing on our invoices, Thorne, the forensic specialist, clicked to the next slide. It was the Helix Crest invoice, the one that hadn't even been approved yet, and on it was a line item, highlighted in red. Executive Strategic Oversight, L. Harrow, 120 hours. At Dr. So. Quinn's request, Thorne said. I cross-referenced the server logs with the billing system. The logs for this project show 180 hours of work by Ms. Cole. They show 0 hours of work by Ms. Harrow. This is, Grant started, his voice a whisper. This is a billing error, a projection. Is it? Thorne said. He didn't wait for an answer. He advanced the slide. The screen exploded. Invoice after invoice. Iron Peak Retail, Solara Mobility, Brightnest Hotels. Each one had a line item. L. Harrow, Strategic Consulting. L. Harrow, Executive Oversight. It's not just Helix, Thorne said, his voice flat. We've identified a pattern of similar billing across at least 3 other major clients. The total amount billed for strategic hours by Director Harrow, for which we can find no corresponding digital work record, exceeds $200,000. The room stopped breathing. These invoices, Thorne continued, advancing one last brutal time, all required senior executive sign-off to be processed. The screen zoomed in on a PDF. It was the Brightnest invoice for $60,000, and at the bottom, in the approved by boxes, were 2 signatures, One was Lena Harrow, the other, clear as day, was Blake Rowland. The silence was absolute. Every eye in the room, including Lena's, swiveled from the screen and landed on the chief financial officer. Blake Rowland had gone a chalky, sickly white. A single bead of sweat rolled down his temple. He was staring at his own signature on the 80-inch screen as if it were a ghost. Arlene Hayes, the general counsel, did not raise her voice. She didn't have to. She looked down the table at the CFO, her gaze unwavering. "Mr. Rowland," she said, her voice perfectly level and cold. "Can you please explain to the board why you were approving billing for strategic hours that the company's own systems now prove did not exist?" Blake opened his mouth. A dry clicking sound came out. He fumbled for his water glass, his hand shaking so badly he rattled it against the coaster. The game had just changed. The target had just doubled, and Lena Harrow was, for the first time, not the most terrified person in the room. Blake Rowland sat in a pool of his own terrified silence, a living portrait of guilt. He was broken, but Lena was not. Into the vacuum. Her lawyer sprang, his voice booming with rehearsed indignation. He stood up, pacing behind Lena's chair as if addressing a jury. "No, absolutely not," he said. "This is not a hearing. It is a corporate assassination. This is a fiction, skillfully drafted by a disgruntled analyst and her accomplice in the IT department." He spun and pointed, not at the screen, but at me. "This is a data coup, a coordinated mutiny. Think about it. A junior analyst, feeling undervalued, decides she wants her boss's job. She conspires with a friend in IT, the only one with the keys to the kingdom, to steal and misinterpret server logs. They collude with a client, Dr. Quinn, promising them who knows what, a better price, full control of the IP. They create a false narrative of fraud to seize control. They are the ones who leak the data. They are the ones who put Nova Pulse at federal risk, not Director Harrow." It was a brilliant counter. He was recasting us as the villains, but Lena, it seemed, was done with lawyers. She pushed her chair back, her face no longer stone, but alive with a burning, righteous fury. She stood. "You're all fools," she said, her voice low and vibrating with contempt. She wasn't looking at me. She was staring at the board, at Grant. "You sit here and you look at metadata, at plumbing. You know what that is? It's nothing. It's the irrelevant work of technicians." She began to pace, her energy sucking the air from the room. "Do you think Helix Crest was going to pay $9.8 million for her?" She jabbed a finger at me, a sudden, violent gesture. "For a 34-year-old analyst who can't make eye contact and babbles about behavioral lattices, no, they don't buy the model, they buy the person on the stage." She slammed her hand on the oak table, just as she had in the meeting that started all of this. "I am the person on the stage. I am the one who makes the work valuable. I take her academic, granular nonsense, and I make it mean something. I am the one who translates her data into dollars. I am the alpha. I am the one who wins the room. I am the value. She," and her voice dripped with scorn, "is just the cost, a technician." Her lawyer looked on, a mix of horror and admiration. She was burning her own ship, but it was a magnificent fire. "And since we are all so obsessed with data integrity today," Lena sneered, "since we're all listening to the technician, let's talk about her integrity, shall we?" Her lawyer, taking the cue, slid a piece of paper onto the overhead document projector. The 80-inch screen flickered, replacing the invoices with a new image. It was a screenshot from Slack, a conversation between me and Noah Ruiz. From 3 months ago, my name was next to the words, "Maddie Cole, ugh. The demo set is a mess. I just massaged the numbers a little to make the sample look cleaner. Just for the internal demo. LOL. A collective." Sharp intake of breath sucked the air from the room. I felt the blood drain from my face. Lena smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had seen from her, and it was terrifying. "So much for our immaculate primary author. It seems she's a data manipulator." "A liar. Just like all the other technicians who can't see the big picture." Every eye in the room swiveled. To me, the HR director, Sarah, spoke, her pen poised. Ms. Cole, is this authentic? A board member I didn't recognize, a woman with iron gray hair, leaned into her microphone. Let's be very direct, young lady. Do you, or do you not, massage the numbers? Do you manipulate data to get the results you want? This was it. This was the moment, the trap she had laid. I could see the path she wanted me to take to get defensive, to stammer, to talk about context, to sound exactly like a guilty technician. I could see the doubt in Grant's eyes. I took one slow breath. I looked at the board member, not at Lena. Yes, that is my Slack message. It is authentic. Lena's lawyer actually sat back in his chair, a faint, satisfied smile on his face. He had won. I wrote that on a Tuesday, I continued, my voice perfectly level, my hands clasped on the table. 3 months ago, we were building an internal-only proof of concept for the Brightnest project. The sample dataset we were using was corrupted. It was returning negative values for time on page, which is a data impossibility. It was breaking the visualization. I met her eyes. So, to make the chart render for an internal progress meeting, I wrote a query to set all values less than 0 to 0. I massaged an impossible negative number into a logical 0. It was sample data for an internal demo, and it was never, ever used in a client-facing model. I noted the entire data cleaning step, line by line, in my methodology notebook. Mr. Thorne, I nodded to the forensic specialist, is welcome to review it. It's on page 4. I paused. The room was silent, but I wasn't done. But I am guilty, I said, and I felt the words, heavy and true, in my throat. I looked at the board. I am guilty of not doing this a year ago. I'm guilty of watching this same pattern happen on the Solara project and the Iron Peak project and saying nothing. I was afraid. I was afraid of her, I said, looking at Lena. I was afraid of being called difficult, or not a team player, or strategically blind. I was afraid of losing my job. It was a small cowardice, but it accumulated, and that cowardice allowed this fraud to grow. That is my failure, and I own it. And if you want to put that in my file, you should. The room was deathly quiet. Lena's lawyer looked confused. This was not the script. It was Valerie Quinn who spoke. Her voice was cold, academic, and final. Let me be clear on what I am witnessing. We have an analyst who has just given a precise, verifiable, and self-critical account of a technical decision made on a non-production dataset. She has owned her work and her own self-admitted cowardice. She then turned her gaze, like a weapon, to Lena. And we have a director who is engaged in a multi-year, systematic pattern of intellectual property theft, provable wire fraud via inflated billing, and a conspiracy to sell company assets to a competitor, for which she has shown zero remorse. We are not comparing apples and oranges here. We are comparing an apple to a ticking bomb. Arlene Hayes, the general counsel, seized the moment. Dr. Quinn is correct. The board must be clear. What we have seen from Ms. Cole and Mr. Ruiz is the behavior of cooperative whistleblowers. What we have seen from Ms. Harrow and Mr. Rowland is a pattern that the SEC would, and will, view as willful corporate complicity. She let that word hang, complicity. If this firm does not act decisively, Arlene continued, the firm becomes the co-conspirator. The choice is no longer about Ms. Harrow's employment. It is about the survival of Novapulse. That was it. The battle was over. Blake Rowland looked like he was going to be sick. Lena's lawyer was silently, discreetly, packing his briefcase. The chairman of the board, a man who had not spoken once, stood up. Recess. We will meet in the executive session. 30 minutes. Everyone, please clear this room. Chaos. The board members filed out into a private chamber. Valerie was escorted out. Lena and her lawyer, and a very gray Blake Rowland, were led out a separate door. Noah, who had been waiting outside, gave me a terrified look. I was left alone. I walked out of the boardroom and found a chair in the empty, carpeted hallway, overlooking the city. My hands were freezing cold. I stared at them, willing them to stop shaking. 30 minutes. I had just admitted to a board of directors that I massaged data, and was a coward. Had I just saved the company, or had I just given them the perfect, documented excuse to fire me? 2. They will think you are too weak to lead the project. Lena's threat from the parking garage echoed in my ears. I had just proven her right. The door to the boardroom opened. My head snapped up. It was Arlene Hayes. She looked at me. Her face was completely unreadable. "Ms. Cole, we are ready for you." I stood up, my legs feeling like hollow tubes. I walked back into the vast, empty boardroom. The atmosphere had changed completely. It was no longer a trial. It was quiet, settled. Lena's chair was gone. Her lawyer's chair was gone. Blake Rowland's chair was gone. The chairman of the board was standing at the head of the table. He looked at me, a long, appraising look. He gestured to the chair directly to his right, the one Grant, the CEO, had been sitting in. "Maddie," he said, the first time he had used my first name. "Please, sit here." I sat. The chair was warm, still holding the residual heat of the CEO. The chairman of the board, a man named Marcus, sat back down at the head of the table. The other board members and Arlene Hayes, the general counsel, retook their seats. The air was still, heavy with finality. "Ms. Cole Maddie," Marcus began, his voice deep and decisive, not a question in it. "The board has concluded its executive session. The findings are clear. We have a profound breakdown in leadership, oversight, and ethics." He looked at Arlene, who nodded. Arlene spoke, reading from a formal document. "Effective immediately. Lena Harrow's employment with Nova Pulse is terminated. For that reason, the cause being gross misconduct, systematic fraudulent billing, and the attempted theft and illicit sale of company intellectual property, all access is being revoked as we speak. Security is escorting her from the premises." I pictured Lena, who had been so desperate to be the person on the stage, being walked out a side door by 2 security guards. "Second," Arlene continued, her voice sharp, "Blake Rowland is suspended, effective immediately, pending the results of a full, independent forensic audit of every account he has ever touched. His access is also suspended. He is being escorted from the building." Marcus took over, his gaze sweeping the room. "This company will survive, but it will do so by cleaning its own house. We will be reimbursing all affected clients for every dollar of fraudulent billing, starting with the $200,000 from Brightnest. We will be issuing formal, private letters of apology, and Arlene's office will be proactively self-reporting this entire matter to the SEC tomorrow morning. We will cooperate fully, and we will be seen as cooperating." He finally looked at me, a long, appraising stare. "Which brings us to you. Maddie, the board has noted your self-admitted cowardice. We've also noted your integrity, which seems to be the rarer commodity." A flicker of a smile. "You will not be disciplined. Your record will be cleared. In fact, we find ourselves in a difficult position. We have a massive client-facing integrity crisis. And you," he said, gesturing to me, "are now the only person in this building with credibility. The board would like to offer you a new position, a promotion, effective today." He slid a single piece of paper across the table. It was a new contract. "Head of Integrity and Analytics," he said. "A new role, reporting directly to the board and the general counsel. You would be in charge of building a new system, a system that protects analyst authorship, a system that audits billing data against work logs. You would be our internal watchdog, and our primary, trusted liaison with clients like Helix Crest." It was a kingdom. It was everything I had wanted: control, protection for people like me, a seat at the table. It was the perfect reward. I took a deep breath, and I pushed the contract back across the table. "Thank you, Marcus," I said, my voice quiet but clear. "That's a remarkable offer, but I'm afraid I can't accept it." The silence in the room was absolute. Grant Ellison, who had returned, looked like I had just slapped him. I accepted a new position last night, I continued. I've been offered the role of Director of Behavioral Insights at a new spin-off from Helix Crest Capital. It's called Cobalt Harbor Labs. I'll be reporting directly to Dr. Quinn. I'm giving Nova Pulse my standard 1 month's notice. Valerie Quinn, who had been invited back in, did not smile. She simply watched. Marcus, the chairman, stared at me. He was not angry. He was recalculating. He saw the board, the client, the leverage, all in a single instant. I was not the employee they were rewarding. I was the client's chosen one. I was the one with the power. I see, he said slowly. However, I said, I have had one condition for the last 30 days. I leaned forward. Noah Ruiz, and the other analysts, like Jessica Chen and David Kim, who were pushed out. I want a written, binding commitment from this board that Noah will be protected. He is not to be retaliated against. Not now. Not in 6 months. I want his H-1B status renewed. And I want him promoted to head of IT data security. And I want the board to retain outside counsel to investigate rehiring Ms. Chen and Mr. Kim with full back pay. You need to prove you protect your whistleblowers, not just punish your criminals. Marcus looked at Arlene. Arlene looked at Grant. Grant looked at the floor. And, I added, I will not be signing a non-compete. I will be free to work with whomever I choose. Marcus stared at me for a full 10 seconds. Then he laughed. A single, sharp bark. Done, he said. Draw it all up. Arlene, we'll sign it today. He stood. One more thing. Maddie, since you're leaving, and since you'll be on the client side, the board would like to retain you as an external advisor at your new standard rate. Of course, to help us build that data ethics program we so clearly, desperately need. I smiled. I'll send you my new rates. Marcus. 3 months passed. The financial papers had a field day. Brightline Vertex was formally put under federal investigation for securities fraud. Tucked into the bottom of one of the articles was a single line. A former Nova Pulse director, Lena Harrow, is said to be a cooperating individual in the case. She had traded her testimony for a deal, just as she had traded everyone else's work for her career. I didn't care. I was too busy. My new office at Cobalt Harbor Labs wasn't a cubicle. It was a glass-walled room overlooking the South Platte River. My new team was not a group of burned-out, terrified technicians. They were a team of 5 young, brilliant, diverse analysts, and on every deck we produced, on every slide, on every report, their names were on the cover page. Right next to mine, the final twist didn't come with a bang. It came with an email, a request for a proposal. Nova Pulse, now under a new CEO and a terrified new CFO, was requesting a formal engagement. They wanted to hire Cobalt Harbor Labs as a neutral third-party partner to conduct a full, top-to-bottom audit of their entire data pipeline and to retrain their whole division of mid-level managers, which is how I found myself. 1 month later, back on the 32nd floor of the Nova Pulse building, I walked through the same glass doors. But this time, I wasn't an employee. I was the client. I was the one with the power. They had put us in the main boardroom, the same room where Lena had slammed her hand on the table, the same room where I had been told to sit down. I stood at the head of the table, my laptop plugged into the console, the 80-inch screen lit up with my title slide. Integrity by design, why protecting your talent is the only strategy that matters. I looked out at the faces in the room, new VPs, young analysts, and a few familiar, nervous-looking managers who had survived the purge. I saw the faces of the next generation of analysts, their notebooks open, waiting. I thought about Noah, now head of his department. I thought about David Kim, who had been rehired with a promotion. I looked at all the talent in the room, and I thought about Lena. I realized, in that moment, what true revenge was. It wasn't about watching the person who humiliated you get dragged out by security. It wasn't about their downfall. The most satisfying revenge, it's about building a system, an environment, a world, where people like her simply cannot survive, where they cannot root, where talent doesn't need to be stolen to be seen. It's about making them, and their entire parasitic way of life, completely and utterly obsolete. Thank you so much for listening. I'm dying to know, where in the world are you tuning in from? Let me know in the comments so we can connect, and you can share your thoughts. Please subscribe to Zoe Revenge Stories, like this video, and if you really loved this story, hit that hype button to help it be heard by more people.